I'm listening to this and I'm listening to that. Remember the time he bit the head off a bat? And it's a podcast and you will love it. It's the Indy 500.
If you ask people around the world their thoughts on John Michael Osbourne, most people will probably say they've never heard of him. A few might guess he's a serial killer or behind an assassination, what with the three names going on there. But if you ask them for their thoughts on Ozzy Osbourne, most people have an opinion on him, whether good or bad, idolizing him or damning him to the fires of hell, laughing at his reality show persona, or bemused as to why he would snort a line of ants when there's perfectly good cocaine around. One thing that we can all agree on is that there might not be a better figurehead for everything heavy metal than Ozzy Osbourne. This summer, in his hometown of Birmingham, England, Ozzy will attempt to do what so few musicians have had the chance to do: say goodbye. The effect he had on music is immeasurable, from his time leading Black Sabbath to his many reincarnations as a solo artist. He could spin a tale about occult figures, an ode to the sweet, sweet leaf, a ballad while missing the love of his life out on the road, or becoming a scapegoat simply by singing a song about denouncing suicide in honor of a departed friend. Sure, maybe he had a little help with the words now and then. Fairies Wear Boots started as a song about Geezer getting jumped by a skinhead, and a few bars later, it was about Ozzy dropping acid. Perhaps it was Ozzy, maybe God, maybe even Lucifer himself, but by some magical force, he was always paired with guitarists who broke the mold and helped him to redefine what rock and metal could be. The many tales about him will grow taller and taller as time passes, more depraved, more absurd, and more out of control. Despite all the rigors he put his mind and body through from 50 years of being the persona of heavy metal, it will finally be Parkinson's disease that puts a stop to him, perhaps proving that, like David Bowie, maybe there is a small part of him that is human after all. Welcome again to the Indy 500 podcast. Today we are taking a pit stop, jumping into the pit headfirst and sharing our thoughts on Ozzy Osbourne. My man Brady is being summoned to a guitar company that can't be named to test new models and new pickups. So joining me today is a very good friend of mine, Joe Nwabum. Of all the people I know, there is nobody more qualified to speak to Ozzy's legacy, as he has been fortunate enough to witness the man himself in many phases of his career. Joe, thanks for joining me this week. I know that Ozzy and his music, are near and dear to your heart. Where does your story begin with Ozzy?
Well, I'll tell you, Phil, my story with Ozzy begins when I was about 12 years old. I was down in Westport, Massachusetts, which is not Westport, Connecticut. And Westport was near the ocean and had kind of a tributary to the ocean. I was staying with a friend of mine. He introduced me to the Paranoid album. And up until then, I was listening mostly to like blues rock, like Aerosmith, Ted Nugent, Leonard Skinner, and stuff like that. And wasn't Paranoid I first heard as a song. It was Hand of Doom. That was my first introduction into Black Sabbath, was that slow, ominous song that was actually warning against the evils of heroin addiction. And something that Geezer wrote when he met veterans coming over from the Vietnam War, when Sabbath was playing at the famous Star Club in Hamburg, Germany. They met a bunch of American Vietnam vets, and they were all strung out on heroin because of the awful things they saw over there. And I thought, I'd never heard a song like this, and never heard it sung just that way.
Yeah.
Ozzy's like maniacal voice, just really communicating the pain that these men were going through. And then suddenly the song, like in a lot of Sabbath songs, speeds up into a different song, all in the same song. And I'd also never heard that before. So that was my first introduction. Then, of course, I started listening to the Paranoid album nonstop. And from there, I got into the first album, and away we went. And this was 1977 when I
Okay.
started.
Yeah, and then I think I sent you a message earlier today. Speaking of that first album, today it's 55 years old. So like really the birthplace of heavy metal, you know. That first song, Black Sabbath, off the album Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, you know, from there the rest is history. Um,
I mean, it's unbelievable, you know.
yeah,
And when you think about that first album, which was recorded like within a day or two
right.
and engineered with, you know, almost as quickly, and then they jumped in the van and drove back down for another gig. That's how quick they did that album, and that's how tight they were, because they were playing several times a day at a club and had to jam out, all because they didn't have that many songs to play. And you can hear all that on that first album, the jamming, the tightness, the jazz
Totally.
in it. And Ozzy's, he didn't write the lyrics, as we know. Geezer wrote them. He occasionally wrote lyrics, but Ozzy's ability to create a melody either with the riff or over the riff was something I'd never heard before either.
Yeah, I mean that voice kind of falls in that category of like often attempted to replicate, but nobody can duplicate it, you know, and just that keen sense of like working with any guitarist he's given, you know, it's Ozzy right off the bat.
100%.
Yeah,
And
and you know, the one thing I had heard in watching the Nine Lives of Ozzy Osbourne thing, kind of about their start, that really made me think like that's actually kind of brilliant how they got there. Is one of their first rehearsal spaces was across the street from a movie theater, so this movie theater was playing horror movies all
yeah, that's
day,
right.
and they had realized like people are paying all this money to see horror movies. Why can't we make horror music?
That's
So
right.
from there, it was just kind of like, yeah, we were playing blues rock, but let's make it a little nastier, a little crunchier, and sing about some scary shit. Ozzy, you brought this book over, and it freaked me out. Like, let's write a song about that. So no, just kind of genius the way they got to where they were.
And that's where they got the name of the band. It was named after the movie Black Sabbath, which was a Boris Karloff horror movie.
There you go. Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Well, cool. So
Earth didn't really cut it.
now, yeah, I mean, it's so ambiguous as to what you're trying to convey there. Black Sabbath, you know, you're in for a dark and heavy time.
And you know what the name was before Earth?
I don't.
The Polka Tulk Blues Band.
Wow.
It's
I
true
don't
story.
know. I don't know if that would sell as well. I mean, the
Story.
music might be the same, but yeah.
Yeah, they were playing stuff like blue suede shoes and blues covers, and they even had horns in the band. And
Wow.
then they dumped the horns. They went to Earth, and then there was another band in Britain called Earth, which is, by the way, where Spinal Tap got that whole thing from.
The new originals and
Yeah,
the
yeah, that's right.
originals.
And then they changed it to Black Sabbath. Yeah,
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I hadn't heard the blues one, but just kind of hearing where they started, like everybody else at the time, you know, going from
yeah,
blues rock to here we are now.
yeah. And they grew up loving the Beatles,
Right.
and Tony Iommi loved the Shadows, and that's where he got his style, from listening to the Shadows.
Oh, that's what I'm gonna have to add to my list then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what was your first live experience? You were kind of already hooked at 12. I
I was
mean,
hooked. Great question. So, you know, I started to get into them right around, you know, the Technical Ecstasy, Never Say Die era of Sabbath, when they were kind of starting to disintegrate. And
yeah.
I remember when Ozzy went off on his own, I was probably 15, 14 or 15 when Blizzard of Oz came out. And my friend Mike back home introduced me to Blizzard of Oz, that first Ozzy album with Randy Rhoads
Mm-hmm.
and Tommy Aldridge and Lee Kerslake, who were two great studio musicians. And we went to see Ozzy at the Orpheum Theater in Boston, which probably seats about, you know, 2,500. Like, great acoustics, a theater, kind of like the Paramount in Seattle.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe smaller, more like the Moore Theater.
Oh, I can't
Between those
imagine.
two. So I'm in like the seventh row from the stage, and band's to my left. And, you know, when you've listened to Ozzy all those years but never seen him live, you don't know. Like, because the first band I saw live was Aerosmith. And it was great, but Aerosmith live was kind of a crapshoot with Steven Tyler.
Right.
So when I first saw them live, Steven Tyler didn't sound that great. I remember thinking, you know, he didn't really deliver.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, is Ozzy's like high voice going to cut through? Is he going to sound like Ozzy? And he came out. I don't remember who the opening band was. I don't remember much about those days, but this I remember. He came out and he held up the peace sign like on the cover of Volume 4.
Mm-hmm.
And just him came out and he started going, "Let's go crazy." And he says, "Everyone's so glad to see you." And this was one of his first shows. He didn't know if he was going to make it.
Right.
Blizzard of Oz had not really charted that much yet, but we were into it. And the band launches into "I Don't Know," the first song on Blizzard of Oz.
So good.
And Randy is playing the white top Gibson. He wasn't playing the V. He was playing that white top Gibson. And live he would always play those harmonics and make him scream. And Ozzy starts singing, and he was note perfect. Sounded just like the record. You always wonder, is that voice put on? It's not. Like, how his voice sometimes almost sounds like it's a double voice?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
his voice.
No, it's the strangest thing. I mean, no matter over the years how much his talking has, degraded, no matter his physical condition, like the man still and has always just had those pipes that like unmistakable. That
He brought it.
Yeah.
And they did "I Don't Know." Second song was "Crazy Train." And then the third, because I remember this, the third song was a new song that wasn't on Blizzard of Oz. It was on Diary, and it's a song called "Believer."
Ooh.
Which is a great song. And little shades of "No More Tears" with "Believer" with the bass note to start out, killer riff. And I remember thinking that was a great song. When you see a new song live, sometimes it doesn't register. That hit home with me. And they just ripped through the set. Randy did a guitar solo. Tommy did a drum solo. And they came out for the encores. And the encores were "Children of the Grave" and "Paranoid." And
I mean,
we were
I love
that he threw in a couple of sounds.
Yeah, exactly. I love that even, from the get-go, despite the bad breakup and everything with the band, it was still kind of like, yeah, those are my tunes too. And, I'm not going to shy away from it.
Yeah. And they nailed him. And I mean, it was probably a 90-minute show, not too long. Because he only had one album, and he threw in a guitar solo, drum solo, and 2 Sabbath songs basically. And it was incredible. And
so you got to see Randy Rhoads actually like cutting loose and just going Van Halen style doing a solo.
Well, then we went to see the same tour down at the Cape Cod Coliseum. So this was in the Orpheum Theater in Boston. Then in the summer, they went down to Cape Cod. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Cape Cod Coliseum.
No.
It's very much like Heavy Metal Parking Lot. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Absolute debauchery in the parking lot. And then you get into the venue, and on the floor, it's general admission. There's no assigned seats and no chairs.
Nice.
So, but we snuck in to the venue before the show. We somehow snuck in through like a back entrance, and we snuck in and saw the sound check.
Oh, nice.
Just Randy wailing, the band wailing, and we just couldn't believe it. And then we didn't get caught. We were kind of scared, and we went back out.
Right.
And then when the show started, we made sure to get up against the stage, and the stage had a wooden partition, like some metal rods, and then the stage. And the wooden partition was against my stomach. And I remember the amps were right here, and I was being pushed against the wood, and the wood started to break.
Oh, wow.
And Randy was right in front of me. And that was incredible.
Yeah.
And then the third show was on the Diary tour, and I had tickets for it. I remember having it in front. And then Randy died when I had the tickets. And there was some question as to whether or not they were going to have the show. And I think Brad Gillis took over.
Okay.
Either Brad Gillis or Bernie Torme. But someone took over for Randy and did his best, but it wasn't the same. It didn't sound.
And so it was basically, were they mid-tour when that happened? I forget. Or was it just kind of rounding into it?
Because the plane crash happened during the tour, right? They had the tour bus and I believe like when the plane crashed, it also like killed the masseuse on the tour bus.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was a diary tour, and the first song on that tour was "Over the Mountain."
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's like the peak era of this Ozzy solo stuff for the most part. I mean,
it really was.
apart from a few things later down the road, with No More Tears, but those
Yeah,
first couple albums, yeah,
those first two albums are basically flawless.
exactly. No, I mean, for me, I came into it a little bit later. My first exposure to him, I think I want to say 7 or 8, and I had seen the No More Tears video on MTV,
Right.
and it
I
was
look
kind of
remember.
like this mix of like, oh, this guy's horrifying, but at the same time, like, that music is so cool. Where do I hear more of that? And then I was looking through my mom's cassette tapes one day. I found the No More Tears tape and just put it in, and instantly from there, it was just kind of like, okay, yeah, this is where I'm going.
He keeps reinventing himself, and
Exactly.
so and a lot of that is obviously Sharon,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So
and I was going to ask you too. Like, he's been really fortunate between Sharon promoting him and being behind him and supporting him, as well as like the musicians. With the musicians, do you think it was Ozzy's ear for musicians, like inviting them into his band, or was it just kind of like, you got lucky 3 times over? You had Tony, you had Randy, you had Zach Wilde, you even had Jakey Lee.
I I think he has an ear because, and the reason I think that is because there's the great story of Randy Rhoads' audition, where Ozzy was referred to Randy Rhoads by like a famous guy in another band. I forget who.
Was it like
Um,
Rudy Sarzo or one of those guys?
no, it was let's see if I can find it. Um, it might have been Gary Moore,
Okay.
but someone in LA said to Ozzy, "You got to hear this guitar player." He saw him at the Rainbow with Quiet Riot, and obviously, Quiet Riot in the Randy era was they were like selling out all the
Right.
shows on the Strip and everything, and I don't think it was Gary Moore. It was another guitarist that said, "You got to, Ozzy, you've got to listen to this guy." And then he told Randy, "Go. Someone's looking for a guitar player. Have you ever heard of Black Sabbath?" And Randy said, "I hate them." He said, "Don't like them." Randy Rhoads was a fan of Bowie's guitarist.
Oh, like Mick Mars and
No. David Bowie's guitarist. Oh God, you know what I'm talking about.
oh, why is this drawing a blank here?
Yeah, I know. I can't believe it.
Mick Ronson, is that the one?
Mick Ronson,
There
big
we go.
fan of
Yeah.
Mick Ronson, big fan of glam rock. So he didn't want to audition, and the guy talked him into it, and he went and he said, "What do you want me to play?" He said, "Just play that solo I saw you play at the Rainbow." So he plugged him into a practice amp, plugged straight into the amp. They had to convince Ozzy, who was absolutely hammered at the time, listen. And Randy just played that solo, and Ozzy said, "That kid's got the job."
Wow.
Period. After playing that solo for like less than a minute, he said, "Give the kid the job." So either he was like not knowing what he was hearing, but I tend to think he knew, because even after that he would choose similar guitar players with similar groundbreaking style,
Totally.
and I think that that has a big part of it. And when you watch, I don't know if you ever watched the End documentary on Prime Video, where they go over the End tour,
Oh yeah, yeah.
or better yet, great albums, Paranoid. They go over the Paranoid album. Good. It's the classic artist albums.
Totally. Yeah.
And the rest of the band talk about how he had this knack for just knowing like what melody to put in the lyrics, and they gave him a lot of credit for basically being a very talented musician in his own right, which he often doesn't get credit for.
No, exactly. I mean, I think, I was kind of doing research on Ozzy lyrics, and it was one of those like, oh, okay, Geezer wrote this, oh, Ozzy maybe helped a little bit on this one. Um, but yeah, I mean, he also wasn't, a net zero. He contributed a lot, just like you said, through the musicality of it and just kind of making those lines memorable. I mean,
Yeah.
brought his own thing. The one, I don't know if you ever heard this story, but it's kind of funny, and it could be true, could be urban legend. Zach Wilde's audition basically came about because he was dealing and Ozzy didn't have any money on him at the time. So Zach was like, "Well, how are we going to settle this?" Ozzy, I don't know. So Zach said, "Well, I heard you're looking for a new guitarist. I got my gear with me. Why don't you let me plug in and audition for you, and we'll call it good?" So Zach goes out to his car, gets his amp and his guitar, plugs in, and next thing you know, Ozzy has his guitar buddy for the next 30 years. So, like, again, on the spot, Ozzy knew, and
Yeah.
just random circumstance of, oh, yeah, my weed dealer, well, I guess I got to give him a shot. Why not? That's the least I could do. Oh, wait, hold. Yeah, you're in.
Yeah, and he turns out to be one of the best guitar players of his era.
Exactly. And I mean,
Jakey Lee was a great guitar player too. That stuff
yeah,
on Bark of the Moon was great. And yeah, and actually I just looked it up. It was the bassist from Slaughter is the one that introduced Randy Rhoads to Ozzy, Big Dana Strum. And Slaughter back then was like, kind of a LA hair band.
right.
Pretty popular. And
Prominent. Yeah. And because Ozzy was living in LA at that point, wasn't that? So he kind of was starting to get plugged into the scene. And
yeah, the quote is, he played this fucking solo, and I'm like, am I that fucking stoned, or am I hallucinating, or what the fuck is this? So he said, you've got the gig.
I mean, I think all of those statements could be true, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but he knows. He
yeah,
just knows.
exactly. Yeah, no, you brought up Jakey Lee, and that was kind of somebody I've been listening to a little bit more this week. Like the Ultimate Sin album, I kind of feel like maybe that's one of the underrated moments in his solo
Absolutely.
career. Is
Yeah.
there anything that stands out to you as kind of like we know all the big guns, but what's maybe something that gets overlooked and kind of you would champion for? Say, hey, I know you've heard the singles. What else should I go check out?
Um, I go back to the deep cuts on the first two albums, because I think it's some of his best work. The title track to Diary,
Mm,
the song Diary of a Madman,
yeah,
it gets virtually no airplay. And like people are Ozzy fans know it, but it is just one of the most haunting, beautiful songs ever. And it's intricate, it's difficult. And on the first album, like that whole Revelation Mother Earth into Steal Away, which that is just, those are two great tracks that complement each
yeah,
other that people really don't know. And you can't talk about Ozzy without talking about the deep Sabbath cuts, because the
yeah.
vocal performance, particularly on Sabotage, on songs like The Writ and Megalomania,
Mm-hmm.
if you go back to Volume 4 and listen to like the vocal performance on Wheels of Confusion or Under the Sun, there's just nothing like it. And if you forward fast to today, when you artists like uh, Carrie Underwood will cover Ozzy, big Ozzy fan.
Right.
Jelly Roll was giving him a tribute. Like throughout those, like people just appreciate like what he brings to the table, and there's really no one quite like him over that time span, because he's been able to bridge all these different musical tastes because people just know and like the songs.
Totally. I had heard a couple of years back, I forget the artist's name at the moment, but there was a soul cover of Changes where it was just
Yeah,
like,
there you go. It changes.
this
Yeah,
is absolutely what this song is. It's just, this man singing it in his genre instead, but like it's that same inflection, that same power of like lyrics that, you know, yes, they started heavy metal, but they were capable of so much more as a group, and Ozzy especially.
yeah, they've influenced so many bands. So you see like Metallica inducted Black Sabbath into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the song they chose to open with was not Paranoid or War Pigs. They chose Hole in the Sky, one of the most impossible songs to sing.
Mm-hmm.
Only Ozzy can sing it, and
Yeah.
Hetfield didn't even try. He just went to a lower octave,
Yep.
which was the right move, right?
Totally.
But you can't replicate that song, nor can you replicate Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, because the vocal pitch is so high. Even Ozzy couldn't sing it after a while. Even
There.
guys like Bruce
Oh yeah.
Dickinson who tried
Right.
took a shot at it and couldn't sing it.
There's urban legend that kind of in the early Soundgarden days they were drawing a lot from Sabbath, And
Well,
there
they
might be
covered Into the Void.
exactly some of those
Yeah,
songs you're talking about, are kind of out there in some of their bootlegs and stuff like that, where it's okay, if anybody can do it, maybe it's Chris Cornell, but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's something you can't fake and get through.
But like they cover Into the Void. You had Faith No More cover War Pigs.
Hmm.
So did the Dresden Dolls. They covered War Pigs.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like and Cat Power sang Black Sabbath in her concerts. The song Black Sabbath.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look for that one.
Yeah,
That's gonna be a trip.
true.
Okay.
Yeah. Um,
Nice.
so they get covered by artists across the spectrum, which you don't often see. Like usually when like someone covers a rock band, they're also a rock band, right? Like especially a band like Sabbath, who you'd think, is very much in the metal universe, but that's not the case. Like other artists have covered their songs like Changes. Like this wasn't an Ozzy song, but Guns N' Roses used to cover a song called It's All Right in concert, which is a technical ecstasy song.
Hmm.
They're deep cuts that people have glommed onto because they realize like these guys and Ozzy were amazing.
Yeah, once you start digging, it doesn't end with just a couple of singles in those first two albums.
Pantera,
It's yeah.
Planet Caravan,
Oh, so good. Yeah.
so good, so good. Think of
So
how
I
old that song
yeah,
is.
I'm curious. Oh, so, yeah, that's on the playlist tonight too now. Yep, little
Yeah,
diamond bag. I'm curious as a fellow guitarist, um, if you had the opportunity to talk to any one of Ozzy's guitar partners over the years to learn how to play a part or get a tone, anything of that nature, who would you talk to and what would you want to learn?
I mean, I'd want to talk to Randy Rhoads, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Iommi, but he's still alive, and you can find his guitar parts, and he gives online, he shows online lessons. Like he's not hard to find.
Yeah.
If it was anybody, it'd be Randy Rhoads, and show me how you came up with Diary of a Madman.
Yeah.
Like, how did you come up with that song, which has elements of classical, elements of rock, like all over the different effects, like all over the board, and he came up with that song pretty fast. And then like songs like Over the Mountain, like the
Right.
solos he came up with, and he used harmonics really well. So instead of playing a chord live, when you saw Randy Rhoads live, um, he would play the chord, and rather than finish it off, resolve it with the chord, he'd just play the harmonic and use the dive bar. And he did
Yeah.
it in a different way. Like Eddie Van Halen did it, but Randy Rhoads did it his own way, and that was something that I learned from him.
Yeah, I loved, the first time I really started digging more into his music, it almost had that like Richie Blackmore influenced, classical sense to it, but not the over the top, masturbatory feel of Ingve, where it's, how
Yeah,
many notes can I use while showing that I know this scale too? Just incredibly tasteful, well thought out music, and
you kind of
it
hope that
just fit.
at this point Ingve got some self awareness, but
Right.
he didn't have it back then. He was just like, whatever I do is great. Um, I
Still
once
that
saw
way. Yeah.
Ingve. I once saw Ingve and AC/DC on the same bill.
Oh my God.
And Ingve came out and he did his thing, and it was just a million notes, and yeah, he can really play. And then Angus comes out, whatever, 30 minutes after they end, just hits an A chord, and you're like, all right, it's happening.
It's always that thing that like stops me from like digging too far back into my shred metal or shred rock love, because it's kind of like who's going to write the melody that you can actually remember and remember 50 years from now, Ingve doing 30-second notes in a harmonic minor, or just Angus doing some blues notes, working on a pentatonic scale. Like
Yeah, or
it doesn't
Malcolm.
have to be complicated. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like when you play old Sabbath songs, as I know a few, um, they a lot of them aren't too intricate as far as like fingerings, but to play them correctly is not easy. And
Yeah.
there's elements of jazz in there, and then the way Ozzy overlays it with his voice, like you mentioned Fairies Wear Boots earlier, that's like three songs in one.
Right.
But the intro piece, then you have the kind of jazzy dun 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 dun, dun, and then it goes into that bridge piece, and then back to the jazzy piece, then it has an outro piece, and Ozzy sings differently on all those pieces, and you never heard that before. You never heard a
Right.
band
It's
change
almost
it
like
up.
the Beatles-esque, like, let's do a song in 3 movements here.
And
But
that's was their biggest influence. If you talk to Ozzy and Tony especially, they were like all about the Beatles.
mm,
100% about the Beatles. Geezer was really into Cream, and Bill Ward was a jazz drummer, and his biggest influence was Gene Krupa, and you can
that
hear that in his
yeah.
playing.
Okay, that makes sense now that you say it, because it's kind of
Yeah,
like that really disciplined playing, but at the same time, when he needed to throw in an awesome fill,
he
he was
swings
there.
a little
Yeah,
bit,
exactly.
and where John Bonham was much more straightforward for the most part, super powerful, incredibly heavy, great
Yeah,
fills. And Bill Ward was a little lighter to the touch,
yeah.
um, and
He
just
had that
that
swing to it.
combined
Yeah.
with Ozzy's voice, which there's no voice like it then or since. Maybe Axl had a similar uniqueness of his voice.
Mm. I was talking with a friend earlier today, actually, about kind of like how much of a connection do you think there is on Ozzy to Axel? And it's like, well, I think there's a little bit, but I think, Axel is definitely kind of a product of a lot of guys of that era, Bon
Axl was
Scott, and yeah.
clearly a Steven Tyler ripoff.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
with the scarves on the microphone, and
Yep. Steven
and,
Tyler with a tablespoon of Mick Jagger and
yeah,
just a
exactly.
pinch of
I mean,
exactly
a
all
much different voice, but
right.
Flash has been very open about his Joe Perry and Brad Whitford influence. But they're all influenced by Sabbath in some way,
Right.
and Ozzy, like all influenced it because of like the workmanlike discipline they put into their shows. Like people only remember when they were falling apart, when they were backing up Van Halen in 1978, when it was the end of the road. They don't talk about the 7 years before that, where they played like 250 shows a year.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, for all the tales you hear of the partying and, debauchery and everything going on, like when they hit the stage, they were
That's
ready to
right.
go. They
That's
still
right.
had it. And
And
maybe it was,
unfortunately, it's not a great live catalog. So if you want to hear like vintage live Sabbath, you can go listen to Live at Last,
mm,
which was released on like an offshoot label called NEMS, NEMS.
okay.
And I remember hearing that for the first time in my friend Mike's living room. Live at Last. He just didn't tell me what it was. He's like, I got a new album. He threw it on, and we didn't have any live Sabbath. You got to understand, let
Yeah.
alone live Sabbath with Ozzy. And it was Live at Last, first song, Tomorrow's Dream, and they just tear through an amazing set. And it's them in their prime. Like it really is.
That's okay. That's a nice little gem I might have to look up because, yeah, just looking at
Then
it.
they repackaged it and they
Yeah.
called it Past Lives.
Okay.
And Past Lives included Megalomania and a couple other tracks. So, but you got to listen to that if you're a Sabbath fan, because and particularly an Ozzy fan, because they would go off and start playing jazzy tunes in the middle out of nowhere, and Ozzy would
Jamming a
rip.
little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like everyone knows a "Sometimes I'm Happy" song that Sabbath would play in the middle of their sets, and I mean, they were just so deep musically, and people don't understand it.
Yeah. I mean, if I had a gripe about the modern, Sabbath farewell tours and the Ozpress performances, it'd be, kind of ignoring some of those later cuts and
Yeah,
just that spirit of like, let's just play to play, and see where this goes.
yeah, they didn't do any of
Very,
that. One
very
thing
locked
about
in.
Ozzy is like he always announced the song that was coming.
Mm,
Like on Live at Last, a couple times he doesn't, but he always said, "This is a song called. This is a song called," and
yeah.
there's no surprise whatsoever unless it was the opening song, or maybe like on Live at Last they just go into Cornucopia and Killing Yourself to Live with no warning, and that's very rare.
Yeah.
And but Killing Yourself to Live was not yet out, and the lyrics are different on Live at Last. So
Okay.
I have a feeling they didn't say anything because they didn't know what the song was going to be named yet.
Just something they're workshopping. Let's
Yeah,
play it. Yeah. Why
yeah,
not?
yeah. You can go back and
Yeah.
then but the solo career is just a stunning achievement. After he essentially had no money, was thrown out of his band, was drunk on drugs, and for the fact that he not only had a great solo career, but he created the modern metal festival. There's
Absolutely.
no whack-in without Ozzy.
Right.
There's no, Ozfest was Sharon's rebuttal to Lollapalooza.
Mm-hmm.
Good for her,
And
because they
it's,
didn't want Ozzy
yeah,
to play. They thought he was uncool, and so she not only did she get Ozfest going, it blew Lollapalooza away.
oh, I mean, there's some bills on Lollapalooza. I know you're a grunge fan as well, where we look at it and it's like, holy shit, that's a lineup. Okay, I wish I was
Yeah,
there for that. But at the
yeah,
same time, like, yeah, some of those early Ozfest lineups and, even the 2000s era was like, if you look now, okay, that's the list of who's who now, and who was who in the 80s and 90s too. I mean, just like all encompassing.
absolutely. And then grunge was kind of critically well received, but all those grunge bands copied Sabbath and Ozzy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, listen to Chris Cornell, listen to Perry Farrell,
Mm.
listen to Jane's Addiction. They are clearly ripping off Ozzy
I
with
always
that
thought there was a
high
bit of
voice
Tony
rising
in
above that. Yeah,
Dave Navarro too. Just kind of that simple, straight ahead blues power chord riffing, and yeah,
yeah,
great stuff. But Sabbath
yeah,
with an LA party vibe.
yeah, and obviously the down tuning. Like I said, Soundgarden covered Into the Void. I mean, Foo Fighters used to cover Sabbath in concert. Um, Faith No More at the same time, like we talked about. Sabbath is all over the grunge era,
Hmm.
and so is Ozzy, all over it.
So my next question for you, I'm kind of thinking about this. 100 years from now, hopefully we'll still have tribute acts and things of that nature. But when the time starts to kind of get further and further away from Ozzy and Sabbath, what do you think like a remaining legacy song or two, or body of work might be? Mozart has his works, Beethoven. The further away we get from these bands being, alive, we might start thinking of it as only like a couple songs. What stands out to you that'll stand the test of time?
If you go to Ozzy's solo career, there's like 3 or 4 phases, and they're all kind of represented by a song.
Yeah.
There's the Crazy Train era, and I would say like the Crazy Train Diary is in there too, right? You have Crazy
Hmm.
Train, Flying High Again, and then the next era is kind of the No More Tears era,
Right.
right? And then you have Mama I'm Coming Home, and everyone's going to remember that song.
Yeah.
Um, in between those, you have the Bark at the Moon era, and
Which,
then
yeah, still incredible. Yeah.
yeah, and think about different guitarists. You have Zach Wild, Jakey Lee, Randy Rhoads, and they're all amazing. But I think that tribute they just did from at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame kind of spelled it out. What did they play? They played Crazy Train. They played No More Tears. They played Mama I'm Coming Home. And it was Billy Idol, Jelly Roll.
Wow. I mean, yeah.
and they clearly love him, you
Yeah.
know. And so I think that is kind of that's the musical legacy is kind of 3 eras in a solo period, and the Sabbath era is a different thing altogether. And then, but the era of live metal concerts, they owe those festivals to Ozzy and Sharon.
Right.
They, that so that's another part of the legacy, and in all the idea of like musicians wanting to pitch in and play, Ozzy also kind of started that because Slash played with him, and like if you look at his later albums, so many different great guitar
Yeah.
players played with him. So I mean, so he also kind of innovated this kind of like
Let's just
friendship
make some
among
music.
fellow
Yeah.
musicians, like that. Didn't you didn't see that before? You didn't see like in the late '70s a bunch of like guys throwing a tribute to Richie Blackmore. That didn't happen. Like,
Right.
oh, Ian Gillan, let's throw him a party. Like that didn't happen. Like he kind of started that whole thing, right?
We can all be friends and jam and, yeah, make
Yeah,
good times together. Yeah.
that's right. And we probably should have mentioned 13, which was Black Sabbath's comeback record.
Yes.
And Ozzy sounds great on that. And that was 2013. So that was like a long way
Yeah.
supposedly past their prime. It went to number one. It won a Grammy, and part of that is kind of like the Oscar for The Departed. It's kind of
Hmm.
like, okay, Martin
You're
Scorsese,
due. Yeah.
you're due. We screwed up. Like, you deserve this, but it's still a great record.
Right.
So it's just, it's just hard to even
Yeah, I
quantify.
mean 40, 45, 50 years of, reinventing himself and,
I mean,
just be at the
Jeff
top of
Beck
his
has
game.
played with him. Jeff Beck played on an album. Mike McCready, Eric Clapton. I mean, he's beloved,
Right.
and he's beloved while being freaking crazy most of the time, because he's
Exactly.
known for being incredibly generous, incredibly down to earth, and always humble. Like, he never understood why he was so popular. Even he would still get nervous before shows. Henry Rollins tells a great story about being backstage when he was with when Henry Rollins' Black Flag was. They actually backed Ozzy up once.
Oh, wow.
Henry Rollins was a huge Ozzy fan, and he saw him backstage. It's like, thank you so much for this opportunity. Henry Rollins said that they went out to this festival to back up Ozzy, and the crowd was bigger than they'd ever seen before.
Oh,
And so they thought they played a great show, and the crowd was all about them. He tells this great story of, like, when Ozzy was about to go on stage, the roar that preceded him coming. Henry Rollins said, "Okay, this wasn't about me, first of all." And then he saw Ozzy backstage, and Ozzy was kind of like nervous. He's like, "What's the matter?" He's like, "Are there going to be anyone out there? Like, do you still think I've got it?" And like, he always brought that humility
yeah.
to everything.
He never forgot where he came from and, that he had to
He
work to get
didn't. He
there. And
came
yeah,
from nothing. Like,
exactly.
he worked in a slaughterhouse. Um, I mean, he was a petty criminal. He served time in prison. Like, no one thought he was ever came from a huge family. He'd go to school with no shoes on because he was so poor.
Right.
No one thought he would amount to anything. So it's
No,
incredible.
I had heard a quote from him today saying basically the first time he got like his record check, he went and got, he got drunk and
Yeah,
he
he
got a
said he got
big bottle of Brute to smell good. And then he got shoes and socks. Like,
yeah, because he didn't have them.
exactly. Celebrate a little bit, but, get the normal things I was missing.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm curious, dad to dad, have you started with your kid on Sabbath or Ozzy? And if the time hasn't happened yet, where would you start?
I haven't intentionally started.
Yeah.
My daughter, who's 10, who you know, um, has heard her share of Sabbath, heard her share of Ozzy solo. I sometimes play No More Tears to get her out of bed. I crank it.
I play Rain and Blood by Slayer for the same thing. So yeah, yeah.
um,
Great minds.
but no, I've not exposed Charlotte to that yet. I have exposed her to the Screaming for Vengeance album,
Hey, there you go.
and she doesn't like it.
Well, it's a starting point.
It's a
It's a
start.
starting point. I mean, there's some
But Priest is
damn fine
great.
songs on there.
Priest
Yeah.
doesn't have too much variety in their sound, and I love their sound. But Ozzy actually has a lot of variety of sound.
Right.
When you look at some of the acoustic stuff he did piano songs, he did slow, moody, psychedelic songs like Planet Caravan and Am I Going Insane, and then he does super hard rock songs. It's just all over the spectrum. Um, yeah, so I've gotten my wife into it. Like,
Hey.
she once said, I can't believe, like, that this is so versatile.
Right.
Now, is my wife going to go, without me here listening to Sabbath? Probably not.
She's not going to get the upside down cross Ozzman cometh tattoo
Well, what's
tomorrow, but
interesting about the crosses is, you probably know this story. They were obviously considered satanic because they wrote songs about Satan. But if you listen to the lyrics, they're about, you need to be afraid of Satan.
right.
Like, Satan is bad. Like, and they wore crosses actually because they were religious.
Right. They wrote scary music to write scary music. They weren't
But they
writing
did
it
not.
to
They
summon
weren't. They
demons.
weren't.
Yeah.
They weren't glorifying it. They were warning you against it.
Right.
And the song "After Forever" on Master of Reality is actually a promotion of God and Jesus and religion, and why that's important in your life. So when they went to these cities and they were being banned and all this, they didn't understand. They were like, "Aren't we saying what you guys want to say?"
No, you said Satan in a song. The first song on the album, we turned it off after that. So who cares what else you said?
Right. Now in the Dio era, that was more glorification
Right.
of like the heaven and hell
The
stuff and
horns and yeah,
horns.
exactly.
And, yeah, but in the Aussie era, they were actually like boys from Birmingham afraid of like Satan.
Well, and I think that's always like the biggest surprise is, hearing that. And then kind of when you talked about it, when you see Ozzy live, he's just like so happy, so jovial, so grateful for every single person there. And
And
it's
that's
not it's
genuine.
not this miserable rock star on
No,
stage. It's like, I am so happy to be playing in front of you guys. Thank you. Like, even if this is
thank
the
yous are
50th time.
genuine for
Yeah.
sure.
Love you
Yeah,
all. Yeah.
yeah, and um, and he always gave like 3,000%. You know,
Yeah.
like some bands when they get older, they kind of mail it in. Like in addition to my metal stuff, I got into U2 when I was
Hmm.
younger and saw them on Unforgettable Fire tour, Rattle and Hum tour. I saw them on the Octung Baby tour. I thought they were great. Um, I watched one of their YouTube shows from Vegas in the Spheres,
Oh, yeah.
and the band still sounded good, but Bono is kind of mailing it in.
Yeah. I
He's
mean,
kind of like
yeah,
he
exactly.
moves in this mysterious way. Like he's like not got the same energy, and Ozzy does.
Right.
Like the only thing stopping him is his body. The will is still there.
And I will say, to a fault, one year I had seen him on an Ozfest tour with Sabbath, and I forget the song off the top of my head, but he couldn't hit the notes. And I think a lot of legacy acts would just kind of go with it because I'm here. He walked off stage. He left because he that's not who he is. He wants to do it right. He wants to do, like you said, give 3,000%. And I was disappointed, but more and more as time passes, like, this guy's a pro. This guy, if he can't do it right, he doesn't want to do it. So,
And
like,
he could have had it piped in,
totally,
but
totally,
they never did that. Never.
exactly. and
And
and I
like
loved him even more for it, even though, like, I got a half performance. I would have loved to see more, of course, and I could have watched it for
felt like
4
when I saw
hours.
Richie Blackmore and Rainbow, and his amp was acting up, and he took his guitar and smacked. This was also at the Cape Cod Coliseum, by the way. It was Riot, Scorpions, and Rainbow. Rainbow was the headliner. Rainbow played for about 70 minutes. His guitar was acting up. He took the guitar, smashed it into the amp, walked off stage, and that was the end of the show. Like,
Okay.
Ozzy
Yeah.
wouldn't do that. Like,
No.
that was out of kind of an arrogant perfectionism, whereas Ozzy was like, I'm not giving the people what they want. It's a
Right.
different nuance.
Exactly. Like, yeah, I'm above these mechanical failures here. I'm not doing this
Yeah,
versus, yeah, kind of the
that
diva
was the
persona.
Dolan Turner era
Mm.
of Rainbow, and as you might expect, the Scorpions kind of stole the show on that one.
Yeah. So actually, that does bring me to another question I was going to ask. We talked a little bit about "Mama, I'm Coming Home," and for me, that is like the most perfect apex rock metal ballad ever created. Now, you brought up the Scorpions, who also kind of had some of those slow rock metal ballads. If you had to pick one to say, like, this is the metal ballad, what would you pick?
From Ozzy or anybody.
Anybody. Mine would be "Mama, I'm Coming Home." I think it just has that perfect blend of, like, slow build, great guitar solo, kind of heartfelt lyrics. Things like "November Rain" definitely come to mind for me, but also a lot of, like, those Scorpion songs as well, where it's just like, okay, it's just,
Um, Mama, I'm Coming Home to me is derivative of another great song that I actually like more called You Can't Kill Rock and Roll, which is on Diary of a Madman.
okay,
I go back and revisit that one. That's one of my favorite rock ballads, and that's on Diary, and I think it's the second or third song. No,
okay,
it's Over the Mountain, Flying High, and then You Can't Kill Rock and Roll. So listen to that one. It's a
okay.
great, great rock ballad. Um, I think the early era of new wave of British heavy metal, you had Scorpions with Holiday,
Mm,
which is off of Love Drive, and that's a really, really great ballad.
yeah,
And Def Leppard, Bring It On the Heartache, I
yeah,
think one of the best rock ballads ever. It's intricately put together and composed. You try to play it on the guitar, it's not that easy. It's
No.
kind of and just kind of focusing on that era right now. Like I
Yeah.
thought the Scorpions did it really well. Still Loving You is another great one from the Scorpions. Or
Winds of Change. I mean, yeah, there's all kinds
Winds
of.
of Change kind of is later.
Yeah.
Like it starts with Holiday, and then Still Loving You, and then Winds of Change is later. Of those, Holiday is my favorite one. And
Yeah. It's hard to go wrong with
an
that.
older one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting though about Def Leppard. You know, when we had the chance to see the G3 tour with Phil Collin on it,
Yeah,
I had no idea that he, you know, the guitarists for Def Leppard were that talented and, you know, that skillful. And it's just like, okay, I need to look at this music in a different way. These guys are writing, you know, these pop oriented songs, but at the same time, the composition and skill on it, like amazing.
Yeah, he's a great guitar player, and so was Steve Clark, who was their original, who just couldn't handle the pressure. He wrote a lot of those early songs, and he was just so great. I mean, there's just so many. You know, when you go back and you think about it, there's just so many great musicians that. Well, Queensryche. If you think about that era, one of my favorite ballads is Silent Lucidity.
Yeah, that's
and that
that's
came
up there.
I think that's on Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole Mind Crime album, there's a couple of the songs on there that are kind of ballady that are just crazy good.
Yeah, no, that's a band that really got them dialed in. I mean, you know, they definitely hit the prog thing pretty good, but yeah, I mean, like the ballads, solid.
Yeah, but go back and listen to Holiday and You Can't Kill Rock and Roll. Those two, one from Ozzy, one from Scorpions. Those are great.
Nice. Okay, we'll do on that one. Yeah, I do need to revisit the Ozzy one for sure. So any lyrics of his, you know, we kind of talked about how he's not necessarily the writer of a lot of them, but there are a few songs he wrote. Any of your favorites that stand out?
I really love the lyrics to Mama, I'm Coming Home, because he wrote those to Sharon.
Yeah.
And he wrote them.
Right.
And it wasn't often that he did lyrics in the Sabbath years. And it showed that he could be a lyricist. And they're really, really good. The lyrics for Diary of a Madman he wrote, and they're autobiographical. They're just talking about how he cannot escape this person that he is. And they're actually quite deep. It's like, how do I fight this? Like,
yeah.
So his best lyrics to me are those that are kind of autobiographical, and they're raw. They're true. They're not like, you know, I love the Rainbow stuff and the Dio stuff, but they're not personal. They're more about other things. Like his lyrics are about his struggles.
Yeah.
And when he did start to write the lyrics, like they're good. Like some of those early Ozzy lyrics are great.
No, one I listened to the other day that really kind of caught me for a loop was Killer of Giants off of Ultimate Sin, and just very politically oriented. And I even grabbed one of the lines, if none of us believe in war, then can you tell me what the weapon's for? You know, just kind of that, like, still a little bit of that war pigs, socially conscious, you know, speaking his mind. And just a great song too, like another composition up from start to end. It's just like, okay, this is another great one from Ozzy. Of course it is.
Yeah, and he may not have written War Pigs, but he meant it.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the same song without the way he, you know, just belts it all out and delivers it in Ozzy style.
And when you hear like a Mike Patton sing it, you know, you realize how powerful. Like Mike Patton did a great job, but Ozzy's voice was more ominous.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't making fun of itself. It was like, this is serious. You know, when you saw Sabbath back in those days, it was all business. It was just like, we are banging out this show and we believe in what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched the Faith No More live at Brixton video many, many times throughout my life. One of my favorite bands. And that cover, it's kind of like, to your point, it's a great song and he does a very good job with it, but he's also just kind of like having the fun, you know, taking the piss, as the English would say, and doing the Satan voice and, you know, kind of all the little silly bits. But like, that was my gateway into Faith No More. Like, how can I find some Sabbath covers? Oh,
Yeah.
Faith No More did this, and it's just not, the What Is It guys. Oh, okay, wow, look where they did this song. I mean, it's amazing.
Well, and it's hard to cover Ozzy era Sabbath.
Yeah,
Like when Metallica did Hole in the Sky, they didn't try to do it like Ozzy. They did it like Metallica
right.
because they were like, we can't replicate it.
Yeah,
Like I said, I saw Bruce Dickinson try to sing Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Like, this is a guy you'd think could sing anything.
right.
Couldn't sing it.
Damn near opera singer. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
couldn't sing it. Like you go back to that album and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, you listen to Ozzy's vocals throughout, and they're perfect. Like
yeah,
that vocally is probably his best record. Um, that and probably the first 3 or 4 solo albums.
yeah,
Um, but vocally, like you listen to a National Acrobat or Killing Yourself to Live, and vocally they're just crazy. And then I've heard them live, and he could do it live.
right.
Like you can find bootlegs from that era where they do like those deeper cuts, and he nails them. It wasn't studio tricks; it never was.
No, I hope that's something in the Spotify era that the public gets more and more access to. It's just some of those bootlegs and live recordings of that era. Because I think, to your point, with just like that, the release that wasn't even an official release per se, like there's not enough documenting of how good they were live in that
It's
era. And
not.
I mean, like
It's
you
not.
have the farewell concerts nowadays, and it's yeah, okay, it's great. You
No,
play the
their
hits, yeah.
prime was whatever. Now you can go find the Paris show. Actually, it's funny. I heard the Black Keys talking about this. They said the best rock and roll concert they'd ever heard was Sabbath in Paris from 1970. And
Okay,
you can find that on YouTube, like from beginning to end, and it's the first and second album basically. And you can't believe how great it is. Like,
I'm yeah, I'm gonna have to put that in the episode comments just so we can
yeah,
get that one
Sabbath
out there.
Paris 1970. Find that one. It's one of the greatest ever. Find Live at Last, which is that's the Volume 4 tour,
Okay,
and they throw in Killing Yourself to Live, and it wasn't out yet. And Ozzy did that too in his solo career. He'd throw in Believer before it came out.
I love that when
That's a
bands do
must.
that. Yeah,
That's a must. Like, unlike because Jimmy Page produced the Led Zeppelin records, and he had a manager in Peter Grant that didn't let anyone fuck with the band. They have a great diary and recording of everything Zeppelin ever did. So when they released How the West Was Won and BBC sessions
right,
and Song Remains the Same, like they had all that material because they owned it.
right.
Like Sabbath didn't have that. They don't have a back catalog of live material. But if you go get the Technical Ecstasy box set, there's a concert recording in there.
Ooh,
There's some great Sabbath bootlegs. Live at Lund, Lund, from
okay,
Sweden is a really good one. And the one on Technical Ecstasy is really good. It's just hard to find. They were like,
yeah,
and that's the thing that's kind of special about Sabbath. It's kind of like no one was at Will Chamberlain's 100-point game,
right,
and it
yep,
kind of makes it more legendary.
yep.
There's a great bootleg of them
It
playing
really happened.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Yeah, look for the Pittsburgh bootleg.
Okay.
That's on the Sabbath Bloody Sabbath tour.
I mean, that's
Uh,
basically like the United States version of Birmingham, anyway, right there. So
Pretty much. It
yeah.
was like 73, 74, that time frame. But Live at Last, Past Lives has all that, and that's a good bet.
So I know you got to get out of here. Last question, and we talked about the final show coming up this summer, and it's probably going to be a spectacle beyond spectacles. In your mind, as a fan, what's the perfect song for him to end on?
Geez, that's a great question. I don't know. I kind of come from the earlier era of Ozzy. The go-to song he always ends every show with is Paranoid, even in
Yeah,
his solo career. I would like to see him end with a slow one.
yeah,
So like he used to do slower songs and kind of have the peace sign go back and forth. Um, Something like that. Something like
I think changes would probably make me cry, or at least claim that I was cutting onions while watching it.
yeah. I don't think he should go out singing like Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
being chased by the devil out the door. I don't
Right.
think I think he should do one that's personal to him.
Yeah.
That's how he should go out. Whether it's "Mom, I'm Coming Home," or whether it's "Goodbye to Romance," which
Oh,
was
yeah.
the ballad on his first record. That's actually a really good song.
Yeah.
Something like that. Something slow.
Yeah. That'd be the way to go. I think you're right though. Just something personal to him, and maybe not the occult in that moment. If you want to open with Black Sabbath, the song, go for it. But
"Diary of a Madman" would be interesting because it's slow, it's fast, it's slow, it's autobiographical, and it might be beyond his vocal capabilities now. Though, like when I saw Sabbath's end tour in whatever 2016 or 17, it was great, but they clearly culled the song list so he could sing it.
right, and everything was tuned down like a step or two just to
Yeah,
fit what he could do. And
which is fine. I get it. It's
yeah,
better than using tricks, you know.
totally. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that gives me, hope about it is like I think that there'll be so many musicians there to chip in and pick up the parts, and I think we're going to see some special things with maybe somebody will sing those high notes he can't get, and he's just there for the choruses, and maybe they'll revisit some of that classic stuff that kind of gone forgotten. High
You
hopes
know,
for that event, but
the guy loved the Beatles,
yeah,
and it's funny. Like he always said, "I heard she loves you, and that's why I wanted to be a rock and roll star."
wouldn't that
However,
be cool? Yeah,
he would end with something like "Yesterday."
right. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, and he's friends with McCartney now. I mean, just everyone loves the guy, and they should.
And yeah, I mean that's the guest list is already pretty incredible. I mean, and there's still 5 months to go. Goodness knows who's
I
going to
hope he
end up.
makes it.
Yeah, right. There's that for sure.
I'm sure
Yeah,
he didn't think he'd make it this far.
right. I mean, yeah, and he's going to give it his all too, and like leave it all on the stage. So I hope there's a way that they broadcast that one live and let everybody enjoy it worldwide.
I hope so too. Yeah, and sometimes I regret not going to the O2 last Led Zeppelin show. It was in like 2007 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
Tickets were like $15,000 or something.
Yeah.
But actually, Ozzy's more personal to me than Zeppelin. As big a fan as I am, because he's just kind of like this misfit kid that made
Right.
it big and always gave back.
Exactly. No, I agree 100%. There's definitely shows that have been maybe more landmark, but I think that's one of the few, even in watching kind of this stuff today and that nostalgic looking back feel, like it made me sad a little bit because this is a guy I've connected with for so much of my life, and, had that, worked hard to get to where I am, and,
Yeah,
love what I do, love the people that I, get to interact with every day and just share a lot of things and through a lot of challenges, and made a great life in spite of all those things. And he's just such an identifiable blue collar guy at the end of the day.
yeah, he is to this day. I mean, anyone who's followed him knows that he's real.
Yep. Well, Joe, it's been an absolute pleasure. We're keeping it to an hour on this, but you and I could probably talk music and metal as we've done, and guitars, for hours and hours, watching some great shows together. So
Let's do it again.
let's do it again. I'm looking forward to it. Joe, thanks so much.
My pleasure. Rock on.
I'm listening to this and I'm listening to that. Remember the time he bit the head off a bat? And it's a podcast and you will love it. It's the Indy 500.